Hello and welcome to the Bald Man Cave, where my goal is to help as many men as possible to cope with hair loss. And I'm really excited today to introduce my dad, who has agreed to be on the channel here with me today. So thanks, Dad, for being with me here today. And I'll just kind of kick things off by kind of starting at the beginning. When did you first start noticing your hair loss? Did it bother you in the initial stages? And did you take any steps in the initial, when you first started noticing it?
Sure. Well, I guess really, if we go way, way back, I had a great head of hair. So, I mean, it's pretty
You
awesome.
did.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
did. I can look at pictures of myself in my teens and early 20s. It was pretty great head of hair. So, but in terms of noticing when I was starting to lose hair, I suppose it was about, I mean, I wasn't overly conscious of it because it was pretty gradual. I would say it probably started, in my late 20s or, you know, 30 or so. It just started getting
Hmm.
a little bit thinner. So I can't say that I did anything about it or anything like that. At that point, I had three kids and a job and all that kind of stuff, and so I was running around. And I was pretty busy. Yeah, so it just kind of snuck up on me a little bit
Hmm.
at a time until
Hmm.
until it was much more apparent.
Yeah. Yeah, you did have a great head of hair for, obviously I've seen pictures and I do remember as a kid, actually there was a moment I remember when I was a kid like talking to you about your hair and it's kind of embarrassing now, but I remember making a comment that like I think I had noticed that you were like receding a little bit or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I remember making a comment to you and you're like, "Wow, I can't believe you just said that." And I was really embarrassed that I said that.
Very
Um,
full.
but when you're a kid, you don't realize some of the things you're saying and how they might impact somebody else. Um, and so late 20s, early 30s, I mean, that was about when I was born because
Yeah.
you were 30 years old when I was born.
Yeah. So
So that was kind of the initial stage when you realized, oh, it might be thinning, it might be going.
And I guess I had a good example in that my dad had lost his hair pretty early, and he also had a great head of hair. Man, if you looked at him in his college years and stuff, fantastic hair. And then in his 20s, he started to lose his hair, and by the time
Hmm.
I was probably it would have been in the 70s, and which is a terrible time, by the way. If you're going to lose your hair, the 1970s was the worst time because it was all about hair then, right? The 60s and
Yeah,
70s, everyone had hair, all this hair.
all the
So
bands with the big hair.
leisure
Yeah,
suits and yeah,
yeah,
big chop sideburns and all that kind of
right.
stuff. So I know that for my dad, it really bothered him. I mean, it was
Mm,
tough for him, and so he went the whole route of the comb over and all of that and gluing it in place until your grandmother, my mom, took him to the barber and said, cut this off. This looks terrible. Don't be doing that. And that's what he did. And he kind of never looked back from there. So I did know that it was possible that I would start losing my hair. I just wasn't really thinking that I would. And
yeah.
then it started to happen. And I noticed I have two brothers, your uncles, and
Yep.
neither of them suffered any hair loss. They
They both still have great hair.
have great hair in their 50s and 60s. So I felt that was unfair, really. Yeah, I felt that that was a
So
bad luck of the draw. But
so I'm glad you mentioned that because the unfairness I think is something that a lot of guys feel with, especially
yeah,
for like someone like me. I lost my hair earlier than you did. I lost my hair in my early 20s, and that was a feeling I dealt with a lot. Was like, this is really unfair.
hmm
Like, I'd look at all my friends, they still had their hair. I was like, why is this happening to me? So even though you lost your hair a little bit later, like in your 30s, what was that unfairness like for you? Were you looking just at your brothers and like, oh,
yeah.
how come this is happening just to me? Or
And I can't say that it was I think probably everyone feels that on a different level, that level of
Mhm.
unfair. I think it's one of those things where you go, it would be really nice if this wasn't wasn't happening, it'd be
Yeah.
life might be better, all that kind of stuff. But really, in reframing it, you just reframe it. There's absolutely nothing that can control this. Zero. And life isn't fair. Some people are taller, some people are shorter, some people are born, to be, naturally more heavy than others. Lots of things that are unfair. I'm never going to play in the NFL. I don't have a great boy. All those types of things. But I have so many things that are more than fair. I mean, so life is just that way. And my
Yeah.
mother used to say that all the time. You say, "Oh, this isn't fair." She goes, "Well, life isn't fair," and that's true. And so I've found that as time has gone on, my hair started to fall out, and I paid a little bit more attention. I started cutting it shorter, doing all those types of things, which is basically how I dealt with it. I just kept cutting it shorter and
Hmm.
shorter. And if I did have those thoughts of this is unfair, it would be nicer. Hey, why did my brothers lose their hair? In general, you just reframe it into a larger frame. So, sure, okay. So, what are the things that you can control? What are the things that aren't fair for you, which other people would go, man, I wish I had those advantages. You know, and
Hmm.
that's really, I think, for me, the best way to look at it. So, well, what can I control? I can't control that. And does anyone really care besides me?
Hmm.
My wife doesn't care. My siblings don't care. My friends don't care. No one really cares. The only
Yeah.
person who might care would be me.
Yeah.
And if you really look around and start looking at other examples, you'd be going, well, let's see. The Rock doesn't have hair. Bruce Willis doesn't have hair. They seem to be doing all right. Yeah, so you just take advantage of your natural things that you can work with
Yeah.
and maximize those and forget about the hair. That's eventually where I got to,
Hmm.
because there's just nothing you can do about
Yeah, for sure. That's something I talk about a lot is focusing on what you can control. Nowadays there may be more things that you can do to keep or get your hair back. There's medication. I don't know how familiar you are with like Propecia, minoxidil. Now there's like derma rolling and things like that. And of course there's hair transplants. You can take some steps to get your hair back, but there's no cure. There's no fix all to this.
it. Right.
So to that point, there is some sense of you really can't control it. So what are the things that you can control, and what are the advantages that you do have that you could maybe focus on? Some things that you can kind of lean into that maybe others don't have. And I love that you brought up the examples of like The Rock and did you say Jason Statham, Bruce Willis
I know.
as it?
That would be another good one. Yeah. It's Bruce
Yeah.
Willis, Jason Statham, which is,
Those are always the examples that people bring up, but I like to point out that there's because those guys, people always say like, well, those guys are like, they're super ripped or like these big like muscle bound
mhm,
guys and like action stars, but there's tons of other examples too.
absolutely.
Patrick Stewart is one, from Star Trek. He's not so much the stereotypical like muscle bound guy, but completely bald and totally clean shaven too.
Like,
And I think pulls off the look very well. Sean Evans is another example I've talked about. I don't know if you know who he is. He's kind of does a talk show called Hot Ones. But again, he's probably more about you and my build and totally clean shaven, no facial hair, no hair on top of his head either. And just rocks the look. It looks great. And I think for guys who are losing their hair, they tend to see it as like it almost sounds extreme, but I had this thought sometimes too. It's like my life is over. Like I'm totally screwed. Which I know that sounds extreme, but like if you're single and you're in your early 20s and you're losing your hair, it just feels like it can feel like the end of the world.
yeah.
It's like, wow, I'm done. I'm just
Well,
completely
yeah. Let's dig into that a little bit
yeah.
more,
Mhm.
because that's a very good point. Because typically, I think where guys are concerned about losing their hair is, hey, will I be found attractive to the opposite sex? Will
Yeah.
I be able to go out on dates?
Yep.
And there are so many studies that have been done that show that whether you have hair or not is not what attracts women
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
I mean, they're interested as, hey, are you competent?
Mhm.
Do you have a job? Do you take care of things? Could you protect me if I was in danger? Do you have a good sense of humor? Do you pay attention? All of those types of things, is reasonably physically fit. All those are the things that women care about.
And those are all things you can control generally,
Those
right?
are all within your sphere of
Yeah.
control.
Yeah.
And you know, you can just imagine if you've got a great head of hair and you're 350 pounds. Um, there's only one thing you can control. You can control your weight,
Mhm.
and that's about it. And you can have great hair, but that's not going to do you a whole bunch of good necessarily. Or if you don't have a job, those are things within your control.
Mhm. Yeah.
Uh, get after those things, and the rest of it, because those things will all build your confidence. Confidence is really what, at the end of the day, is what works. I have a buddy from college who did lose his hair in college, and pretty precipitously, and he had no trouble getting dates. He was a very confident, outgoing sort of fellow, and he just didn't pay any attention to it,
Mhm.
and because he didn't, it was a non-issue for him.
Yeah.
So
That's something I remind, people who listen all the time is it's it really is a non-issue unless you're the one focused on it.
yeah,
Because when you're focused on it, then you actually lose confidence because of it, and that's what people actually pick up on, less
yeah.
so than the actual physical representation of hair. It's the, oh, I'm losing confidence because of this, and that's what really shows up.
Think about it. You could go back to biblical times. You could go back to Samson, and Samson, if you remember the story, I mean, he was incredibly strong, and but he felt that his power, his strength, was all derived from his hair.
Hmm.
And so when I think it was Delilah, you know, cut his locks, as they said, cut his hair and cut his hair off, he lost all confidence in his strength and could no longer perform what he could do before. And of course, what had changed? Really nothing, just his outlook
Hmm.
and how he was approaching it. And so, to me, that's just a great example of how we let not just with our hair, but anything. It could be anything in life where we let those things control us and sap our confidence, sap our drive, and they don't have to.
Yeah. I agree. There's a quote from Larry David about, if you can find a confident man without hair, that is true confidence. That's not exactly the quote, but basically what I look at it is he's saying it's easy if you have these like physical attributes that just inherently bring you confidence. Maybe it's you're very tall, or you do have a full head of hair, and that's what you're relying on for your confidence. That's a physical attribute that you are. If that ever disappears or goes away, then all that confidence is gone. So if you can find confidence without those things, then that means that you are truly a confident person,
Right.
because you're finding confidence from something that you can control, something that you bring value to, something that maybe it's humor, maybe it's something else that you find confidence in, and not something that's just physically attached to you.
That's right. If you think about a NFL football player who's injured and taken out the field and can never play again, what does that mean to them?
Hmm.
Or if you're a soldier and you lose a limb, what does that
Hmm.
mean?
Yeah.
Does that change your life? Does that mean that you're no longer the same person, that you can't achieve and do things that will help the world? No, it doesn't mean that at all. And we've seen many inspiring stories over the years of people that have gone from what seems like a catastrophic situation and turned it into something good and powered through it and moved on. And I recognize hair loss for some folks, it does seem like a catastrophic situation, like you were just talking about. You're
Yeah.
in your early 20s or late teens or something, and you're like, oh man, this is the worst. But I guess if it can be approached in that same way, as someone who approaches a life changing event that they didn't expect to have happen, like a car accident or anything else, then you can figure out a way to rise above that and
Hmm.
and, and move on. And some people have been able to take these terrible things that have happened to them and actually flip them around, and it has turned into a springboard for them to do incredibly great things in an area that they never thought they would be involved in.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when you get to that acceptance point of, okay, I was not expecting this thing to happen, and it was tough to deal with, but when you get to that acceptance point, it opens up the door to just so many other possibilities once you can kind of finally let that thing go that's been holding you back. That's how it was for me, for sure,
Yeah, all that
with my
energy you
hair.
put into fighting against that,
Yeah.
it's energy that
The
you should
yeah, the amount of mental energy I put into thinking about my hair, if I could get all that time back, but
yeah, take
So
a
I
chance.
want to
Yeah, go
yeah.
ahead.
Um I wanted to just back up a little bit because I want to kind of go through your story, your hair loss. So it started in your late 20s, early 30s, and at that point you were very busy. You were, like you said, well, at that point you probably had two kids, maybe one more on the way at that point, and working very hard. Do you think that because you were so busy, that kind of just kept you distracted from the hair loss, or was it something that like continued to stay with you on a regular basis? Because for me, it was even when I was working, I'd go into the office, and I'd be busy working on stuff. I would still every few minutes or like I don't know every half an hour.
Mm,
I mean, it was a lot more than I care to admit. I would think about my hair,
yeah,
and like that I was losing it, and I would kind of like it just without even thinking about it, my hand would like go up to my head and like just touch my hair because I knew it was like thinning, and it was just a thought that was always in the back of my mind. Was that the case for you or not really?
no, not really. I think, and because my hair loss started a little bit later, and I reached that point where, like I said, I already had children and more on the way, and had my own business, and so uh, we're just super super busy. So
Hmm.
I didn't think about it. I think it'd be more if when I did think about it, I just thought, oh, that's kind of sucks. That's too bad. But not much beyond that, honestly. Or like we talked about earlier, oh well, my brother still have their hair. Well, I guess they got the lucky hair gene in the family. So, um, but it would, and like I talked about my dad. Well, he lost all of his hair, and his brother kept all of his. But his brother passed young, and uh, and did not have a particularly successful life, and my dad did.
Hmm.
So I didn't really spend a lot of time thinking about it other than to when it would pass my thought, or if I was at the barber or whatever it happened to be, or and like it'd be nicer if I had hair, uh, but not much beyond that. So, but even that was a waste of time. Even that little bit of a thought, like, well, that would be nice. Well, okay, so what? Like we said before, it'd be nice if I could sing. I can't. I can't hear you. Um, it'd be nice if I could do magic tricks. Well, I could learn magic tricks. Um, but really, at some point, it got when I think you really, you're probably the one who inspired me just to get rid of what I had left, because in some ways, by doing that, it's just exerting control over
Hmm.
what you can do. You can't make hair grow back on your head. You can't. You could spend a lot of money doing all that, but you can certainly take it off and get rid of
Yeah.
it. And just say that's the way I'm going. I'm all in. This is my new look and my new style, and that's it. And people like it or don't like it, I don't really care because this is what I've got going on. That's all I
Yeah.
can.
That I agree with that 100% because the feeling of control that you have, like that, there's something to that where by just taking the action of completely like shaving your head clean, it does feel like you're kind of back in the driver's seat a little bit.
Yeah,
By taking that action, it actually feels pretty good. And
right.
it was quite liberating and kind of a cathartic experience for me. Just because for me, I had dealt with, you know, 10 years of just like anxiety about this situation. Um, and one thing I kind of want to dive into a little bit is, for me, I feel like I'm somebody who's pretty lucky where I have a pretty good support group. I have a good family, you and mom and my siblings, and I have good friends who, like, this is probably something I could have been more open about and shared more about, like, how much I was struggling with, how much it was like affecting my mental health and how depressed it was making me, but I still didn't feel comfortable doing that. And I think part of it was because logically I knew it was a superficial thing I was worrying so much about. Where, like, in the back of my head I said there's so many worse things happening to to people. Like, I'm not in a war. I don't have a terminal illness. I don't have, like, there were so many worse things that could be happening. And so it didn't feel like something I could bring up, because I guess in the back of my mind I thought people would just say, "What do you are you really that worried about this? It's just hair." But it really did impact me a lot, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on, if I were to come to you, let's say when I was 22, when it really started to start happening. I know that you would not have judged me for bringing that up to you. And I guess what do you think your reaction might have been had I been more open about it at that point?
That's a good question. Think probably I would have just, like most of these things, just sat down and just started asking you some questions about it, just to find
Hmm.
out what was at the root of it, and try to help you see it in a little different way, or maybe reframe it. I think honestly that just whether you talk to me or someone else, but just the act of talking to somebody
Hmm.
about it and getting it, actually saying the words and having it come out of your mouth and having say,
Yep.
this is a big thing. This is bothering me. I'd like to talk about it and get some feedback. That alone, just by even saying it, just kind of reduces impact of it. I mean,
Yeah.
the impact of the problem. It's like anything. We think, man, this is a big thing in my mind, and then you start to talk about it, and you go, okay, maybe I can get on top of this and control it,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have to consume my life. But I think
Yeah.
we
There's
would have sat there and you know picked it around some. I probably would have shared some stories about myself and others, and just to help you realize that I don't know what the percentages are. You probably know because you've been looking at this more. But what are the percentages of men that experience hair loss? I'm sure it's a pretty darn high
it's
percentage.
very high. Yeah.
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 The older you get, the higher it gets, right?
Yep.
So
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, and even your other grandfather, who had a great head of hair, and was glad to tell you all the time that he did have a great head of hair. Even he started to lose his hair, later in life, and he commented on it. It's like that bothered him, and oh, some of us have been doing this for a lot
Yeah.
longer. I
Yeah.
got
There's.
to I got to tell you one story though, because it just popped into my head.
Mhm.
When I first got out of college, Dad and I went to a Toastmasters club, and there was a guy there who was a good friend of your grandfather's, my dad, and he was a small business owner at a fencing company. And so he had to give a speech one day, and he was talking about this thing that had been bothering him. And he had this whole kind of story, and you're just wondering, what is this? What is this? And he said, I'm not going to be controlled by this any longer. And the last thing he did at the end of the speech, he wore a toupee. We thought, well, he probably, and he took it and he ripped it off and he threw it in the garbage, and he never wore that toupee again. The ending of the speech, everyone's just in the audience like, whoa, that's incredible. He got a lot of very positive feedback for it. But at that time that he gave that speech, he would have been in his probably late 40s, 50.
Hmm.
And he had been struggling and suffering with this feeling that he had to have, a full head of hair, and had to wear this toupee, and but he broke free, and
Yeah.
he was so happy for having done.
That's
Yeah.
that's amazing. I love that story. um, Yeah, it really is a freeing feeling because as dramatic as it might sound, it really does kind of feel like you're shackled in a way to like this. I need to look a certain way. And for those who have maybe did have a great head of hair at one point and then they start losing it, it's like my identity is changing a little bit. Or like this thing that I felt like it was a part of me is now going away. And it can be very anxiety inducing. And so I can totally understand where he was coming from. Like, well, and I bet for all the years that he wore that toupee, he was probably still filled with anxiety
Sure.
about his hair. He was probably worried like, "Oh, I bet people know I'm wearing a toupee," or
Right.
something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
have to, glue it on every day. I have to get everything
Yeah.
right, and I don't want anyone to see me without it. And
Mhm.
yeah, just so much time and effort and
Yeah.
anxiety around it, and money.
Yeah.
Your mom was saying something to me today about her haircut or something, or some color cut and something like that, and I just looked at her and said, "Well, glad I don't have to worry about that." So, you just kind of lean into
It
it and embrace it.
yeah. It's amazing how easy it is to maintain, once you finally accept it. But I kind of wanted to jump back to something you referenced before when you were talking about or when I mentioned it, well, what would you have said if I had been a little bit more open with you about like what I was dealing with? And a phrase that I came across recently is sunlight is the best disinfectant, meaning when you just bring things out in the open,
Mhm.
sometimes that is so amazingly like healing in a way.
It is.
Just if you've been carrying something inside for such a long time that you kind of start to spiral, you make it worse and worse in your own mind. And then all of a sudden when you finally get to that point where you share it with somebody else and you go, huh, that really isn't that bad. It really isn't as bad as I thought it was. That was a really, really challenging part for me was just being able to get to that point of being able to like be open about it.
About 100 pounds lighter, and
Yeah, I talked about this years ago.
but I think that's true. Everyone has stuff like that, whether it's related to their hair or something else that they're usually everyone's got some sort of a burden or secret, that they feel like they're carrying around. Once they talk about it and set it down, you know, life's a lot better.
Absolutely. A big part of I think hair loss for younger men is just that is like well, it's great for, some people. They already met their like significant other and then they started losing their hair. I'm losing my hair. I'm not even dating anyone yet. They think that they're totally screwed. Like they have no chance because they're in their early 20s. They're trying to date and they're losing their hair. So they feel like they are not as attractive as they could be or that they're at some disadvantage because of that. Something I talk about a lot is if you just look around. Sometimes we spend a lot of times online and it's easy to like look for the evidence, even if it's the evidence you don't want, you can still find like people say, "Oh yeah, if you're losing your hair, yeah, you need to um you need to get that taken care of or you're screwed or whatever." But if you just look around, there are tons of guys who are in happy relationships, living happy lives, who are completely bald or losing their hair. Do you have any, I guess thoughts on that just idea in general? Like did mom when you were losing your hair, was that something that was brought up at all or was she just like, "Yeah, whatever."
No,
Yeah.
not once.
Yeah.
No, I mean, never made any comment, which just goes to the point that usually your partner does not care. And the idea, if you think about it, right, the idea that the person that you're dating and then in a long-term relationship with or married to, that their feelings about you would change if you didn't have hair doesn't say much about the relationship or what you think of that person. So if you just back that up to the dating phase, say, well, so you're losing your hair in the dating phase. Well, if that person is going to hold that against you at that point, want to be with them at a later point.
It's kind
So,
of like a filter, right? Like you're
right, it's a filter. Yeah, if
yeah.
they're so shallow, that that they are going to say, well, you don't have hair. I'm going to overlook the fact that you have a good sense of humor, you're honest, you're trustworthy, you're a good provider, you pay attention to me, all those types of things. Nope, the hair's, well, you're a pretty shallow person and probably not a great person to spend my life with.
Yeah. And one final question for you then is, now that you have, fully embraced this and you go for the clean shaven look now, what do you like most about it? And I guess if you could have your hair back, would you take it back, or does it matter anymore?
Yeah, would I take it back? I don't know. I think that's a really hard question. To me, it's like a non-issue
Yeah.
at this point. I got other issues. So, um, so I don't think that I don't really care. But certainly, ease of maintenance is great. You know, I mean,
Hmm.
uh, do I miss going, shooting the shit at the barber shop? Sure, but I could go down and have a shave done, right? So you can do
Yeah.
that if you like the camaraderie of a barber shop and stuff, which I do. That's always kind of fun, go to
Hmm.
a barber shop. But I actually, since I've done this, which has been a while now, but I haven't even bothered to do that. And just saving money left and right. So
Yeah.
yeah, and it's easy.
I mean, it really is. I mean, honestly, nowadays a haircut could cost you 40, $50,
Yeah,
$60 easy.
yeah,
And usually, I mean, I would go once a month when I still had
sure,
hair. And it's not like it's a crazy amount of money, but it's also, hey, it's nice to have that extra money
yeah.
each month. And now and I know you have the skull shaver like I do, and it takes you what, 5 minutes, just run it over your head and you're done.
And every once in a while, I'll do the razor thing just for fun.
Yeah.
I know you're not a fan of that.
I don't usually go for the full big shave,
Yeah.
but yeah. And then do you have you noticed that, like, other bald guys, will they kind of like give you a nod when you pass by? Have you
I
felt that sort of like
I haven't done that, but I think I'm older, So at this point, most of us can't even see or hear properly. So that might be something for the, a younger set.
Yeah, maybe so, maybe so. Well, Dad, this was awesome. Thank you so much for
Uh,
joining me, and I think it helps just to hear different perspectives on this
yeah,
whole thing, and to realize that you're not going through it alone, because that's what it feels like sometimes. For you, maybe it was looking at your brothers saying like, "Oh, they have their hair. I'm losing mine." For me, it was my friends all have their hair. I'm losing mine. No, it feels like you're going through it alone sometimes. So I think just hearing other people's stories is incredibly helpful. So,
and I think that's where the internet is a positive thing in that sense, right? Because it allows people to talk to other folks and hear their stories and recognize, it's really not that big of a deal.
yeah.
Uh,
And to the point you made earlier, most people are not thinking about you, right? They're concerned about their own lives.
yeah,
They're worried about their own problems, and they're not thinking about the things that you're worried about, which might be, oh, my hairline's receding or my hair's thinning. They're not thinking about that.
yeah. If you think about when someone doesn't call you back on the phone or something, you left a message or you send a text or something, they're not responding. You're thinking, man, they got to be pissed at me. There's something going on, and of course, it never is that, right?
No,
It's
yeah.
I got tied up at work, or
Right.
but that is the human reaction. It's got to be about me. I've done something.
Yeah.
Everyone's looking at me. Nope,
No,
no one cares.
no. They're just,
No one
yeah,
cares.
exactly. They're just worried about themselves.
Exactly right. They've got their own little problems. And I think I'll probably butcher this saying or quote, but it's the quote about if everyone could take their problems and set them down and look at everybody else's problems that they had set down, they would probably just go ahead and pick up their own set of problems again because
Yeah.
everyone's got problems. Everyone.
Yeah.
Lots of people go, well, I want to be like that famous movie star, or I want to be like that influencer, or whatever it happens to be. And well, you're going to have to take all the bad stuff that comes to the good. And if you really got into their lives, there's plenty of stuff that they're dealing with, and maybe not so great.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes the grass looks greener on the other side, but sometimes that grass is over a septic tank. Uh,
Exactly right.
all right. Well, thanks again, Dad. This was great. Really
Fun.
appreciate it.
Inviting me on.
And
I really appreciate it. And I
and
think what you're doing, and I'm sorry that you had to suffer through that so long by yourself and in silence. And I'm glad you finally said something and kind of moved past it.
yeah, I
Because you're
appreciate that. And yeah, hopefully by sharing it, it helps other guys who are going through a similar experience. So yeah. So for anyone who's listening, appreciate you joining us, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.